I'm Shannon Burkle. Thanks for joining us today. I've been with Axios HR for 18 years. Born and raised in West Michigan, I've had the privilege of working with hundreds of small to mid-sized businesses in West Michigan, mostly in the human resources and the staffing space. Today, we're going to focus on management training specifically, and I have two fabulous speakers with me here today that'll chime in about halfway through the webinar. So we've all heard this saying, people quit managers, not companies. So the first thing that makes me think of is the recession in 2008. Many of the small to mid-sized people had to go through laying a lot of their employees off. They cut into their temporary buffer first through their planned staffing pool, and then many companies had to cut into their core employee base. In addition to that, companies were cutting expenses all over, mass expense reduction. One of the first expenses that was cut in most businesses was training and development. Those businesses, for the most part, hung on to, during the tough times, the most loyal employees and the best doers, the most efficient, the most productive. So if you look at today, and every business leader's number one challenge is talent attraction, retention, and development. But then most of the managers, great people, very loyal, fabulous doers, but do they have management experience? It's really time to look at managers' capabilities and bring back the training and development that managers need to be successful and to retain your top talent. So before we dive in, let's take a moment just to reflect. So think about your own management team. Have you provided all the necessary tools, resources, training, coaching, and development that managers need to retain talent in today's competitive environment? How can these managers be expected to effectively develop their team if they don't know what effective development even looks like? Ask yourself, do your managers have the right tools in their tool belt to be successful? And are your greatest assets potentially your greatest liabilities? So we're going to go through a poll real quick. Oh, we already did the poll. Some of you might have missed it, but basically it was half think they provided the right tools and resources, half didn't, and the other half wasn't sure. So I would suggest that as a starting space. So when I'm working with any small to mid-sized business and I'm going to provide supervisor manager training, the first thing I start with is, how well do we know each other? How well do you know yourself as an individual, as a manager, and how well do you know everyone on your team as well as your fellow peers? Imagine running into conflict your whole career and never really understanding why. Well, the why is because we all have different personality types. We all have natural cognitive functions, and understanding that is what creates a winning team. Understanding that is what makes a manager effective. So this is my suggested starting place. So think about, there's all kinds of personality tests out there. Myers-Briggs type indicator, the Strength Finder, DISC assessment, AccuMax survey. Decide what's best for you, or bring on a consultant to help you clarify that. Prompt the right questions for reflection and use these results to know your team, build a winning and unstoppable team. So here internally at Axios HR, we use Myers-Briggs types indicator. The first thing I always tell people is all personality types are great. In Myers-Briggs, there's 26 types. Every flavor is wonderful. All it's trying to help an individual with or a team with is to know their dominant type. What's their comfort zone? There's no right, there's no wrong. It's just someone's natural tendency. So I'll give you a couple examples of how we use it here. When we are onboarding someone as a new hire, we use the personality assessment. We use it in our daily language, introductions, and all our teamwork. When we're with clients, and we also have formal training. And everyone here at Axios has a laminated copy on their desk, and it says what their personality type is. The top says their natural functions, like what's their comfort zone. So for example, one of my comfort zones would be organization, highly organized. And then the second part of this laminated sheet says what gets them spinning. So for me, that would be extreme disorganization, as an example, would get me spinning. So this is the starting place. You have to get to know each other before you can build a strong team and be a strong manager. So we'll pause for a quick polling question. Does your organization use a personality assessment to help you work better as a team? I'll give you a moment. Okay, looks like 75% of people on the webinar do not, so there's an opportunity there. And 25% joining us today have used a personality assessment at some point. So now I wanted to dive into what management training really looks like. I won't go into these points in detail because I want to give enough time for the case study conversation, but these listed on the slides here are the most common and popular training sessions. So it's not limited to these 5, but these are the ones we find most effective, most desired when we're going out to small to mid-sized companies. So the first one is manager and employee expectations. It's very important to identify and discuss manager-employee relationship expectations. You got to make sure they're written down. They can't just be assumed, and they have to change. So I always, when I onboard someone, I start by, before they even start, having set expectations. Every month for the first 90 to 6 months, resetting, talking about those expectations and resetting them, and then quarterly. And I will say some businesses, the trend is not annual. The trend is more quarterly and even moving towards monthly sit downs with monthly expectation discussions. So we have an entire training session. You could build a whole session on that topic. Second most popular I see is starting the employee off on the right foot. So specifically in manufacturing, a lot of my clients that I work with are in the manufacturing realm, is that first day is critical. I have clients doing amazing things like meeting a new employee, at the front door, handing them a bag of goodies, a t-shirt, spending 5 minutes to get to know them, giving them a tour, doing an end of day wrap up, end of the week wrap up. So those are the type of things in this session that you can build. What does that first day look like for every single new person so they feel comfortable and you start off your relationship on the right foot? Third is probably the toughest. Training managers on how to train others in new tasks and procedures is tough. So it's going to sound basic, but this session you can build to cover basic training approaches, and then more importantly, how do you gauge training retention? How do you know that the employees are actually learning and able to utilize what you've trained them? So that's a really critical session. Fourth, prioritizing work. I am a believer in meeting rhythms and meeting routines. But my advice would be when you have a huddle and you're talking about the priorities for the day, for the week, for the month, whatever, always include the why. Managers sometimes don't understand that if they don't include the why, they've lost all the motivation and they've lost all of their employees into the buy-in of what those priorities are. So always explain the why. And finally, handling challenging employee situations. You could build an entire session around this. Often employee situations are sensitive, they're tricky, and the best way to help equip a manager really is to role play and talk about scenarios that have happened in the past. Give them real life examples so that at least when they're faced with a challenging situation, something rings a bell about how to at least begin to handle that. And right before I jumped on the webinar, I asked one of our trainers, what's the number one thing if you were doing a manager training that you'd want to make sure the group understood? And I asked her right before the webinar started, and she said to develop relationships. Managers need relationships with their peers, and managers need relationships with their team. And if you at least can understand how they operate, what their natural tendencies are, and you can build a relationship with them, you have the right foundation. So I'm going to turn it over now to two of our fabulous guests, Todd Vanden Vice President of Staffing Solutions with Axios HR, and Andy Sharon, General Manager with Forming Technologies. I won't go through the details of the case. It's up on your screen, and I'll leave it to the two of them. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. So thanks for joining us on the webinar today. This is Todd, and we're with Andy. So I'll give you a quick rundown of Andy and I's relationship. So we provided Andy staffing labor for his manufacturing facility, and over the years got to know his company kind of inside and out and built a relationship that was necessary to have success from both sides. And so Andy and I would meet regularly, and at one of our meetings, he was talking about outsourcing and getting a kind of like a motivational speaker to come in and speak to his supervisors and pump them up. And at that point in time, kind of deep diving into like the why do you need someone to come in and motivate your supervisors? I think through that discussion, it actually led to a deeper solution and a much more complex solution in figuring that out. But so I'm going to introduce Andy and maybe ask Andy, at that point in time where you were thinking that your supervisors needed help, what were some of the pain points that you were seeing to get to that, to get to that level?
Well, at the time, our supervisors, it was exactly like Shannon said in her talk there. We had promoted from within. We took some of our best employees, promoted them up through the ranks, and lo and behold, they became supervisors. And we had gone from, we had incurred quite a bit of growth. We had gone from an $8 million a year company to a $20 million a year company. And we started to see a bunch of issues on the floor and with our supervisors. And through my discussions with Todd, we stumbled across, well, have we given them all of the tools to succeed? And I didn't at the time believe that we had. So Todd had suggested doing some supervisor training through his company, Axios, and that's where we brought them in to help us try to give our supervisors the tools for them to be successful.
So kind of the early sessions of meeting, we came to the conclusion that we needed to kind of set some goals, number one, and then that would kind of facilitate our training sessions with his supervisors. So can you speak a little bit about maybe some of the goals that we set initially?
Sure. At the time, we had seen a spike in our scrap rates. We had seen low productivity. Our downtime was off the charts, and we were struggling trying to retain employees. And not all of our employees are hired in employees. We were pretty good there. Once we hired the employees, and we did a fair job of keeping those employees around. It was with the new employees and the temporary staff that we really struggled. We struggled onboarding, we struggled training, we struggled just like Shannon said, giving them the why. Why were they there? What were they? How were they going to help Forming Technologies be successful? And we were really poor at that. So we developed some metrics, and one of them was, we targeted a scrap rate, we targeted some uptime, and then we also targeted employee retention. And through that process, we also realized that we needed to do some work with our whole staff, our whole management staff, and we developed a RACI, which stands for responsibility, accountability, consulting, and informed. So we laid that out for everybody in the company, so everybody knew what their roles were and who were involved in each of the key processes within the company.
All right, well, thanks, Andy, for sharing that. So my dad was a teacher, and he always said that if you ever go to a webinar or you ever go to a seminar, that you need to get if you learn one thing in that half hour, that one thing in that hour, that it was worth your time. So I'm going to share with you perhaps maybe that one thing right now. So, hang on tight for this. So turnover, Andy mentioned that, or employee retention. Turnover is often a term that is used within organizations, but it's typically used at the HR level and in upper management. And I think upper management and HR have a pretty firm grip of that. To me, what I've recognized over the years of being in staffing is that it needs to get down to the supervisor level. I think it's a pretty critical point that they should be measured on that. I think companies like Andy's have an idea of scrap and uptime and downtime, and their supervisors may or may not know that. I think some of them do. But the one thing that they're not aware of is turnover. I think they know that it's happening, but I don't think they know the reasons why, and I don't think that they're held accountable for that. So I think it is a metric that should be brought to the floor at the supervisor level, and I think it should be broken down by shift, by department, and it should be something that's talked about on a weekly basis to analyze the reason why people are leaving and to see what the supervisors can do to offset that. Because they're the ones that are with them 40% of the, or I'm sorry, they're there 100% of the time. They're there 40 hours a week. They're side by side. They're your frontline defense when it comes to turnover. This group that's on this webinar, they're not the ones that are there hour by hour, day by day. So if I could give you one piece of advice would be to bring that metric to the floor, bring that metric to your supervisors, and hold them accountable from at least a visibility standpoint and a discussion standpoint.
And to interject on that a minute, Todd, we did that. We brought it to the floor for our supervisors, and working with Todd and his team, we were able to track our employee retention. And surprisingly to us, everybody thinks that second shift is the toughest one to be able to staff and to retain employees. We saw that it was our third shift. So we needed to dive into that and see what was going on. And working with our third shift supervisor, we were able to come up with some solutions and provide him some help so that he could retain the employees and not lose key people as readily as he was.
So Andy, besides laying the groundwork for those metrics, including turnover, what were some of the other things that came out of it that you felt benefited your organization from this this particular supervisor training?
Well, as I mentioned before, we had to do a little bit of work up front with our entire management team, and that greatly benefited us. We did the Myers-Briggs personality test, so we all know what we all are now and how messed up some of us are. But no, like Shannon said, we all have a personality and it's all good. But we did that, so we learned a little bit about each other. But I think the biggest thing that came of it for us was the onboarding of our employees. So our supervisors in the past would have a new person come from staffing, they'd walk in the door and they'd shout out the name of the machine that they needed to go down to, and 20 minutes later you'd find that employee standing in the middle of the aisleway because he didn't know where he was going or what he was supposed to be doing. So now we have dedicated trainers that work with the employees when they come in the door. They take them on a tour. They are with them the entirety of the 8 hours that they're there the first day, and then they are also with them for a couple of hours each day during the first week, and then we assess them at the end of the week, and we allow them to provide some feedback as to how we're doing. And we also, working with Todd, developed a PowerPoint presentation and a slideshow for any potential employee that comes through the staffing office that they can see before they even get to our plant. So it tells them that they need to wear safety glasses, they need hearing protection. This is the kind of part that they'll be making. So we make heavy parts. So we provide lifting instructions and all of that kind of stuff up front before they even walk in our door. And for me, that was the biggest benefit from the employee training.
All right, thanks, Andy. So I don't really have anything more unless Shannon, you have anything that you would like to add or discuss?
No, why don't we open it up for a Q&A before we wrap? That'd be great. You can type in your questions right at the toolbar on the right-hand side. Okay, one question that came in is, what's the length of time for the training? Like, how much time do you have to invest, to feel like you've had a successful management training? Like, how many sessions and how much investment?
We did 6 sessions once a month, and the Axios staff was on site for 2 hours each session.
Okay.
And then Andy, who attended?
The attendees of most of the meetings were all 3 of our supervisors, our assistant supervisors, our trainers, myself, and some of our upper management staff.
Okay. Thanks, Andy.
Any other questions? All right. Well, we have a final polling question before we let you finish your afternoon. So are any of you interested in learning more about supervisor training? Yes, no? I'll give you 1 minute here. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. You can check out all of this material at our website on the resources page. You'll also get an email specifically with all of the information that we covered today, as well as if it's your first time joining our monthly webinar, you will receive a subscription to MIBiz. Make it a great afternoon. Thank you.